right, so here's the drive shaft tunnel. You see the yoke from the rear diff is back there. Drive shaft's out. Um, trans is in. Clearing the cross member. We've got it spaced pretty nicely off the cross member height-wise. I've just got it propped up right now just to keep it off keep the weight off the cross member. As far as the trans mount goes, you can see what's going on here. The extension on the bracket on the factory cross member is clipping the mount for the trans mount. But other than that, that trans mount's going to be perfect. All I've got to do is I've got to nip the end of this bracket off to clear and weld on a second bracket right here to support the backside of the trans, and that should be a pretty straightforward job. So I'm going to get this cross member back out and clean the end of that, knock the end of that bracket off, and then get the trans mount back attached to the transmission and start fabbing the bracket up for it. But the way the engine and trans are laid out in the car right now, that's about perfect. I'm going to measure I need to measure the drive shaft length. I'd like to try and use the existing factory drive shaft. Of course, I'm going to rebuild new U-joints and everything, but I need to measure the yoke-to-yoke distance and make sure the drive shaft length is right. The drive shaft, I have a drive shaft for it. That's all steel. It's a nice shape, and I'd like to use that if possible, and just avoid having to have one fabbed, have one made up if I don't have to. It's just no reason to throw money at something you don't need to do. And that's that. So we got to get the trans mount done, and then work on the shift cable bracket and start getting everything, any fabrication that's got to get done. Start getting ahead of that, get it planned out. But you'll notice that the transmission does not sit centered in a tunnel. It needs to offset to clear the emergency brake bracket, emergency brake cable bracket, which it will right now. It's easy enough to eyeball. If you look through the cross member, you can eyeball the center line on the tail shaft housing with the split between the bolts on the factory mount. So we've got the tail shaft centered in the same location it was with the original trans, which is not necessarily centered in the tunnel, because if it was, we'd start whacking into that bracket, and then of course we'd have other clearance issues as well. So don't OCD about having the trans centered in a tunnel. It doesn't have to be, as long as it lines up within a degree or two of the differential and clears the emergency brake cable bracket. There's actually a pulley mounts in that bracket there, and you're in good shape. So I'm going to get started, get this cross member out and knock the end of that bracket off so it clears the tail shaft housing, and put the mount back on the trans and put the cross member back up, and we'll start working on the support for the trans mount. Yeah, so here's that factory trans mount. You can see how wide this sucker is, and I would need about 2 inches clearance between the center line of the holes on the transmission to the cross member for this to be in a happy place and give me a little clearance of the cross member. And right now there's only about an inch or an inch and a half between the center line and the back, so I'm going to order up a polyurethane energy or prothane mount, because I think the overall width is much smaller, and see if we can get it in the cross member in the spot it's in. I'm trying not to shove the motor too far forward. I mean, it has room to go, obviously, but I want to try and keep the weight as far rearward as I can to get more weight on the back tires. There's no reason to weight the nose down anymore. I try and keep the weight distribution what makes the most sense. So if I can avoid shoving that motor forward anymore, moving it on the mounts, then that's what I want to do. So let's get a polyurethane mount in here and see whether it is much narrower than this guy and clears, and go from there. All right, so there we go. Got that cut off. Cleaned up the edge a little bit, made it nice and flat. So we're just about ready to, we'll get this back reinstalled underneath the trans. Get that polyurethane mount installed, and then we'll hang a bracket on the bottom of the mount, line it up with the cross member and tack it. And I'll come back and we'll get through that process too. So the trans is in. Still have to fab the exhaust, obviously. But I think the trans will be good to go. Once I get on the road, of course, I can evaluate it for any kind of vibration, and if I need to adjust the height, the tail shaft height, I can come up a little bit just by adding some shims between the mount and the crossmember bracket. I can change that pinion angle, or change the angle at the drive shaft yoke. Although it measures out, okay, I should be within like 1.5 degrees on each side, and we are good to go.